Hi friends, I hope everyone's doing well. It's been a while since I've used found ephemera in my collage practice. I had to look back through my videos to see the last time I filmed one, and it's been over a year. Until recently, I haven't come across any found ephemera that has inspired me to include it in a collage. But for today's video, I have 3 pieces that sparked my creativity: a yellow Post-it note with writing, a torn lottery scratcher, and a piece of white lined paper with financial notes. Along with these found items, I gathered some monoprinted papers and acrylic paint just in case they're needed. The colors of these supplies coordinate nicely. I haven't fully planned out the design yet, so let's get started and see what I come up with. Instead of an art journal that I would typically create in, I'll be using this 9-inch by 12-inch paper as a substrate for the collage. I'm using it because this ephemera is 8.5 inches by 11 inches. I'll be cutting or tearing it into smaller pieces, but I still want the substrate to be large enough to use as much of the ephemera as possible. Also, I don't have an art journal large enough to accommodate it. As I was organizing my workspace to start this section of the video, I got an idea for the design. I'll add the inspiration collage now so you can see it. I made it in another video that I'll link in the description area. It's a horizontal composition collage with some of the elements placed vertically down towards the bottom of the substrate. Quick heads up, I'll speed up the video a bit going forward and switch to voiceover with some music. Now let's continue on to the collaging section. I'm preparing this ephemera for collaging by tearing it into sections. I'm planning on using 2 long list sections for the lower half of the collage. I want the 2 sections to be unevenly spaced apart. I typically like to orient the ephemera either upside down or sideways or at an angle. I don't want the viewer to easily read it. I want it to be seen as an element, not reading material. The remaining sections of this ephemera will be put aside and used for accents later. I decided to use soft gel matte medium as the adhesive. I prefer to apply matte medium on the back of the ephemera instead of directly on the substrate. I find that I get a stronger hold with this application. Also, I will apply it on top of the white ephemera so the ink won't smear because I'm planning on applying paints on at least some of it. It's a good idea to have a smoothing tool handy, especially for this type of ephemera, which has paper on the thin side. It helps to smooth out the wrinkles and make sure the ephemera is evenly secured to the substrate. While applying the matte medium on top of this ephemera, I realized it was a copy, not an original. Sealing the copier ink is extra important to protect it from smearing. Before the next step, I decided to add more of the white financial ephemera to the already glued sections. I didn't like how some of the substrate was showing along the edge. The next step is to add blue paint. I decided to use this color instead of purple or yellow paint because the blue will contrast so the found ephemera will stand out. Also, there's a small amount of blue on the lottery ticket, so it seemed like an obvious color choice instead of introducing a different color not already represented in the ephemera. I'm using a plastic card to apply the paint because it gives a different look than a brush, an uneven textural look. You can see it in the middle of this section. My initial design plan was to add blue paint in between the two papers. I was thinking the contrast between the blue paint and the white paper would be interesting. By the way, I added a piece of used paper underneath just to keep the table covering somewhat clean. Also, I like using what I called waste paper in my artwork. This paper needed more paint so it can be used in future collages. I put too much paint on the left side. I tried to remove some of it while softening the edges of the paint. I didn't want the edges of the paint to have a hard edge. As I was doing this, I realized the contrast between the blue paint and the white paper was too strong. It had become a stripe pattern, and that's not what I wanted. I made the decision to apply a light amount of the blue paint over the whole white paper section. I didn't want the paint to be too thick because I still want the text on the white paper to show. I went back and forth with the paint and wiped away some of it to achieve the look that I wanted. I suggest using a blue shop towel instead of a regular paper towel for this technique. The blue shop towel doesn't leave fibers on the surface like a regular paper towel would do. Once I got the blue paint the way I wanted it, then I continued collaging. I needed to figure out the placement of the yellow Post-it note at this point. I decided that I didn't want the word repossessed to show. I placed it in this location so there's room to add either more ephemera or paint on top of that section of it. Also, it's off center. I decided on adding the lottery ticket next. I want the elements made from it to be placed vertically. These elements will unite the top and bottom half of the collage. Also, I want part of the top edge of the lottery ticket elements to be covered with ephemera. I decided to cut away the sections that have the round dollar signs. I wanted to see if they would be a strong visual element on their own for this area. I want to point out that I didn't want these three elements to be the same size. I like uneven elements because it's more visually pleasing. I was unsure if using those elements was enough, so I placed the top half of the lottery ticket besides the middle section. While I decided if it was needed, I started to glue down the sections on either side. I applied a generous amount of the matte medium to make sure those elements were secure to the substrate. Also, I want to point out that I'm using a shop towel to clean off any excess matte medium and to use it when securing the elements to the substrate. Next, I decided that the top half of the lottery ticket would work along with the round dollar sign element in the middle section. Once these elements were secured to the substrate, I came back in with the matte medium and applied a thin coat on top of each one to dull the glossy finish. It's a personal aesthetic, not a necessary step. I wasn't sure if I wanted to add more vertical elements, so I started to work on the top half of the substrate. I encourage you to let a section of your artwork sit if you're unsure what to do next. It's best to move on to another section of the artwork or work on a completely different artwork. The next move will come to you once you let it rest. For the next section, I'll be using the remaining white financial ephemera and some of the monoprinted papers. I'm started by working on the area closest to the lottery ticket elements. I want to cover the edges while building the collage from this area up, also covering part of the yellow Post-it note. I like this muted color paper with the gray dots because the yellow color is a close match to the yellow in the Post-it note. Both are on the muted side. I'm holding off on gluing the small white ephemera until I have the area around it covered with monoprinted papers. I want it to sit on top so enough of it is showing. I'm tearing the purple circle paper into a shape that will curve around the yellow Post-it note to soften the edges. I don't want to keep the straight edges of the Post-it note. Also, part of this purple paper will cover the top edges of the lottery ticket element. Now that the purple paper is glued in place, I can glue down the small white element. Moving on to the right side, I want to use the remaining white ephemera along the edge. I think using smaller white ephemera on both sides will unify these two areas and balance the design. While figuring out the placement along the edge, I want to address the area around the Post-it note. I want this purple paper to curve around it and partially be behind the white ephemera. As with the white ephemera on the left side, I want these white papers to sit on top of the monoprinted papers that'll be slightly above them. As I'm building this area, I'm being mindful of the placement of the monoprinted papers. I want purple and yellow papers in this section, along with balancing both color papers in the remaining top edge section as well. In this section, I tried numerous purple circle papers to see which one would work. Since it will be next to another purple element that's dark in value, I wanted it to be read as mostly light value. I decided on this section because out of all three paper choices, it reads as mostly light in value. I trimmed the paper that overlapped the edges so I had a better visual of how the finished collage would look. This helps me to see where I need to add accents. There's some of the substrate showing along the top middle section that needs to be covered. Also, the upper right side could use another light element. Finally, I wanted to go back and address the three vertical sections. I felt each one was a bit weak looking. To have a stronger impact, each one needed more elements to widen and or lengthen. Along the way, I was mindful of keeping each one in different sizes and shapes. Also, adding another color to each one helps to balance this area with the top section. Let's have a final review. I'm glad that I used blue paint on the bottom section. As I mentioned, there's a tiny bit of blue in the lottery ticket, so it's a color already represented in the ephemera. I like the uneven texture that it created on the substrate and the white financial ephemera. The small white financial ephemera and yellow post-it note in the top section worked nicely with the yellow and purple monoprinted elements. The vertical elements connected the top and bottom sections together so the design was balanced. Also, having these elements vertical instead of horizontal adds an interesting detail to the design. Here's the grayscale version. All three values are represented. The light value is the white financial ephemera, yellow post-it note, and the yellow monoprinted papers. The mid-tone value is the blue paint in the lower section, and the dark value is the lottery ticket and the purple monoprinted papers. I encourage you to use found ephemera in your art practice. It's fun, challenging, and free. Let me know if you have any questions. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch this video. Take care.